And has Mr. Heaphy been admitted? Great. And there's just one preliminary issue, Your Honor, when you're set up.
Actually, let me start again.
Your computer tends to. So one preliminary matter. Congressman Buck testified yesterday as their witness on the January 6th committee and the report. We would move to strike then Congressman Neal's declaration from the record. Since we're not getting the opportunity to cross-examine him, they made the choice that they used Congressman Buck rather than Congressman Neal's. He had some things in his declaration that Congressman Buck did not testify about. I don't plan on asking Mr. Heaphy to rebut what's in Mr. Neal's declaration, since it should be struck from the record.
I already additionally admitted the testimony, or the January 6th, and considered Mr. Neal's declaration. So I think to the extent Mr. Heaphy has things he wants to say about that, he should go ahead and say them.
Okay.
But given that I conditionally admitted, you may decide that it's not necessary.
Okay.
But I can't kind of move. Well, I can. That's what they say about bench trials, right? That you can forget what you saw. But I think it would be my preference if Mr. Heaphy has things to say about the Neal's declaration, he probably should.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Your Honor?
I think if Mr. Heaphy has things he wants to say about the, well, first of all, why don't you tell me? Would you like me to consider, when I make my final determination on the January 6th report, the Neal's declaration?
Yes, Your Honor, and we believe it's proper. The court isn't necessary. The court is not required to only confine itself to testimony when determining the admissibility of a report. Obviously, the court's already made consideration of that and viewed it, and so we think we've already relied on it, obviously, and it should stay in. And I'm guessing you'll put the same amount of weight on it as you have already. So
That would be my preference as well.
And I appreciate that, Your Honor. I'll just make the record that yesterday we were given the choice of door one or door two, Neal's declaration or Congressman Buck. And we had to choose Congressman Buck. And so I think, given that you've required us to make Mr. Heaphy available for cross-examination, even though he had submitted a declaration and we were willing to stand on that, and that Congressman Buck has been made available for cross-examination, Congressman Neal's has not suffered the same fate. So we're happy if Your Honor wishes to consider it, but would just urge you to consider it for the weight it deserves.
And I agree. It would be a little bit contradictory here, but why don't you, if Mr. Heaphy's ready to respond, why don't you do that? And in my final findings and fact conclusions of law, I will state one way or the other whether I consider Mr. Neal's declaration.
Thank you, Your Honor. So would you like to swear Mr. Heaphy in?
Yeah, can we make it so, change the view so we see he's a little bit bigger? Mr. Heaphy, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm seeing fine.
Okay, so I think that you're going to need to do something to get closer to the microphone because you're very faint.
Okay. Is this any better?
It's getting better.
Is that any better? Not really?
Nope.
Not great.
I apologize for the technology issue.
You're not the first, Mr. Heaphy.
Yeah. I just don't know where the microphone is, so I'll just have to speak up as long as you all can hear me this way.
Yeah, but that works, but it's
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And we'll let you know if we're having trouble hearing you, okay?
Okay, I will speak up, Your Honor, and I apologize for the faint audio.
Can you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I swear yes.
Great, thank you.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
My name is Tim Heaphy, it's spelled H-E-A-P-H-Y. I'm a lawyer at Wilkie Farr in Gallery, Washington, D.C. I previously served as the Chief Investigative Counsel to the House of Representatives Select Committee to investigate January 6th attack on U.S. Capitol.
So we'll get to the January 6th committee in a moment, but just want to go over your background a little bit. Where'd you go to college?
I went to the University of Virginia.
What degree did you get?
Got a bachelor's degree, was an English major, that was in 1986.
Did you go to law school?
I did.
Where'd you go to law school?
I came back 2 years off. I came back to UVA and graduated in January 1991.
What did you do after graduating from law school?
I was a law clerk to Judge John Terry in the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, and then I worked as an associate at Morrison & Forster law firm in San Francisco.
How long did you work at Morrison & Forster?
For about 2 years until my wife graduated from graduate school, and we then moved back across country to Washington, D.C.
What did you do when you went to Washington, D.C.?
I was an assistant United States attorney in the District of Columbia. Eric Holder was the U.S. attorney at the time who hired me.
What did you do while you were an assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia?
I was there for almost 10 years, and I moved through various sections in the office, tried 65 jury trials. Ultimately, my last assignment was in the gang prosecution unit. I had a 13-month-long racketeering trial, capital case in federal court in Washington, D.C.
What did you do after leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia?
I moved to Charlottesville, where I still live, to be an assistant U.S. attorney in the Western District of Virginia. That was in 2003.
And what did you do when you were an assistant U.S. attorney there?
Similar to what I did in D.C., investigated and prosecuted a wide array of federal crimes.
After 3 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Virginia, where did you go?
Going to private practice, I went to McGuire Woods Law Firm and offices in Richmond and Charlottesville.
What type of work?
Criminal defense practice. Sorry, Sean.
No worries. Did you do investigations as well?
I did, yes.
And how long were you at McGuire Woods?
I was there for a little over 3 years until I went back into government service in the Obama administration.
What was the government service that you went back into?
President Obama appointed me to be United States Attorney for the Western District of Virginia, where I had been an assistant, and I was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in October of 2009. I served in that position as U.S. Attorney to the very end of 2014.
What were your duties as U.S. Attorney?
I supervised the work of the office, all of the criminal prosecutions and civil cases tried by the 30 or so lawyers who represented the western part of Virginia.
You said you finished there in 2014?
Yes.
What did you do after that?
Went back to private practice to another Virginia-based firm, Hunton Williams, where I was splitting time between Richmond and Washington, D.C. I was the chair of the white-collar defense investigations practice at Hunton Williams.
At some point, did you do some work for the city of Charlottesville? Oh, we lost you.
Yes, I lived in Charlottesville, lived there this whole time, and in August of 2017, there was a horrific public event in which there were public protests and fatalities, and the city hired me and a team from Hunton Williams to do an independent review of how my client and the city prepared for and managed that event. There were a couple of previous events that summer of a similar nature. I put together a comprehensive report about the Charlottesville events.
Was that event in August of 2017 the Unite the Right rally?
Yes, it was.
When did you become involved with the January 6th committee?
Not until it was formed. I believe in June or July of 2021, the House passed House Resolution 503, creating the Select Committee. Soon thereafter, there was an effort to put its staff together, and I was one of the first half a dozen people hired to be involved in the leadership of the staff.
What was your official position?
Chief Investigative Counsel.
How did you get that position?
I spoke to the people that were tasked with putting the staff together. That was largely the Speaker Pelosi's top aides, as well as a couple of people that had already been hired, the staff director and chief counsel to the January 6th committee. I spoke with them and was hired, I believe, in the middle of August. I started like August 15th or 16th of 2021.
What were your responsibilities as chief investigative counsel?
And I should back up. Jeremy Thompson, I spoke to him, and he ultimately made the hiring decision to hire me as chief investigative counsel. So my duties were essentially to run the day-to-day investigation. First, hire a lot of people, lawyers and other professionals to do the work, fact gathering of the investigation. And then over the course of duration of the select committee, I supervised the work day-to-day.
How many lawyers ultimately were there roughly on the investigative staff?
Yeah, at various times it was about 20 total lawyers, and then a bunch of other professionals, some subject matter experts, some paralegals, and other professionals that helped contributing to the investigative team.
How did you choose who would be on the investigative staff?
Investigative experience. Candidly, I was looking for people that had been investigators, that had interviewed witnesses, that had reviewed large amounts of information to derive what's relevant, whose judgment and character I trusted. But I have a very strong interest in serving on the committee, so it's really just ultimately a very talented group.
What percentage were individuals from the U.S. Attorney's Office or DOJ roughly who had investigative experience?
I think out of the 20 lawyers, about 3/4 were former DOJ lawyers at some point in their careers, and that was not an intentional thing. It was more those were the lawyers that in my experience had really developed the skills that were most relevant to the work that we were doing, and could do lots of interviews, could review lots of information, and again, who had the right ethical approach to the work.
How, if you know, did the investigative staff for the January 6th Select Committee differ from typical congressional investigative staffs?
Most of the people that we hired had never worked in Congress before, because again, Congress really doesn't do these kinds of investigations very often, and therefore a lot of the lawyers from other congressional committees didn't really have as much investigative experience. The work differed. My understanding, particularly I never worked on a congressional investigation before, but my understanding is that the other thing different about our process was the involvement of our members. The members of the committee themselves were very involved in day-to-day turning of the wheels of the investigation. They participated in interviews. They had up to the minute, sometimes daily, reports on what we were learning. And I think that's different from the normal congressional process, where the staff does most of the work, fact gathering, and members, are sort of given that information before the public proceeding.
But as you understand it, typically the investigative staff does not include seasoned investigators from the DOJ.
I don't believe that is typical.
Now, what party affiliation are you?
I'm a Democrat. Appointed by President Obama, and yes, been on record as being a Democrat.
Was there any political litmus test for determining who would be on the investigative staff for the January 6th committee?
Absolutely not. I frankly don't know the political affiliation of most of the people on the staff, unless they said something or did something that would reflect that. It was not something that I ever asked about or was a criteria.
Well, just focusing on people who you did know, were there Republicans on the staff?
Yeah, yes, there were.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure, John Wood, for example. John was a Bush-appointed U.S. attorney. He actually ran for Senate as a Republican, left our staff to do that in 2022, I believe. He came to us from Ms. Cheney. Ms. Cheney had another counsel who reported to her directly. Ms. Kinzinger had a lawyer, I believe, who was also a Republican. So there are a handful that were, but again, that was, in my views, at least, they were not something that we asked about.
When did your team begin the actual investigation?
Right away, we knew all along we were a time crunch. We were going to expire at the end of Congress and had just a lot to do. So almost immediately upon my arrival in August of 21, we were requesting documents. We were starting to talk to people. I think some of the first transcribed interviews in which I participated were in September of 2021. So very soon after this point.
What was how long did the investigation last?
It lasted up to 11:59 p.m. on January 3rd of this year, and again we used every possible minute to get things done. So it was about 16 or 17 months altogether.
Did you intentionally string out the investigation so that it corresponded with the midterm elections?
Your Honor, I would just object to leaving.
No, there was no screening out. Quite the opposite. We were very focused to move as fast as we could, and frankly could have gone on for just a few months and had additional potentially relevant information to try to find.
What was the final result of the investigation?
The resolution of the Creative Select Committee required us to produce a report that would make both factual findings about the facts and circumstances that gave rise to the death of the Capitol and make some recommendations to try to prevent similar events in the future. I believe the report, I don't remember the exact date, but sometime in mid to late December was issued. It's 845 pages, and that's kind of the official record of the committee's factual findings and recommendations.
Have you submitted declarations in this matter?
I have, yes.
Have you reviewed those two declarations, your opening declaration and your supplemental declaration?
Yes, I did earlier today.
Do those continue to be truthful and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm not going to go over the declarations. You have them, and I know the intent of this was for cross-examination, but I do have some questions for Mr. Heaphy regarding rebuttal issues.
Would you like me to consider the declarations that you submitted?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Your Honor. Just to short circuit this rather than go into it at length since you've seen them. Now, there has been some suggestion by Congressman Niels in his declaration. Well, first of all, have you reviewed Congressman Niels' declaration in this case?
Yes, I have.
Now, he suggests that the January 6th report is somehow compromised by virtue of the fact that the committee presented doctored evidence at the hearings. Are you familiar with that allegation?
I am from Congressman Neal's deposition and some public reporting on that issue, yes.
What is your response to the assertion that evidence was doctored?
Strongly disagree with that characterization. As I said in my declaration, there was a text message that I believe a member of the committee used during one of our public proceedings, which incorrectly indicated that a particular sentence from text messages ended as opposed to continue. A period was inserted instead of an ellipsis. And when that was called to the committee's attention through our spokesperson, we acknowledged the mistake. It was a mistake, not an intent to doctor evidence or mislead. And there was also some allegation that there was video or audio that was doctored. Again, strongly dispute that. That there were some times where we used in public proceedings silent Capitol Police surveillance footage and then dubbed over that contemporaneous police radio transmissions in real time to correspond with images that were in the surveillance footage. And I don't consider that to be doctoring of evidence. It's simply putting two pieces of evidence taken contemporaneously together. So that, unless I'm forgetting something from Congressman Neal's declaration, I believe those are the two allegations that are disputed.
Those are the only two. Did you ever hear any allegation that other evidence was doctored somehow?
No, I don't think so. I mean, those specifics I recall. No, I don't remember any other specific accusation of doctoring.
How many pieces of evidence were actually presented, and I don't need an exact number, but just ballpark, during the 10 public hearings?
Pieces of evidence, broad term. We played clips of depositions. We showed documents or images that had been obtained. Hundreds and thousands over the course of the hearings, and then the hearings were a subset of what we actually presented in the final report. So I think the report indicates exactly with more specificity than I can recall how many documents we were able to obtain, how many witnesses we reviewed. All of that is detailed with more specificity.
Now, there was a question raised yesterday about whether or not the January 6th committee had interviewed leadership from the Capitol Police. Did the January 6th committee interview leadership from the Capitol Police, including Chief Sund?
Yes, we interviewed 6 or 8 or 10 even senior officials of the Capitol Police.
Were there any interviews or depositions that were kept confidential and not released to the public?
Yeah, there were a handful of national security-related witnesses, primarily worked and some continue to work in sensitive positions inside the White House that we agreed that we would not release the identity of those witnesses or the transcript because public release would be debilitating to them individually and to the safety and security of the White House complex. So there were a handful, 3 or 4, I think, of those transcripts that we did not release.
Other than that small number of transcripts you did not release for national security purposes, were there any other interview transcripts or deposition transcripts that were not ultimately made public?
I don't think so, no.
Now, do you recall that the committee took a deposition of a person named Kash Patel, former Chief of Staff to Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller?
Yes, I was personally president for that and participated in the questioning of Mr. Patel.
Was his deposition transcript kept confidential somehow?
No, I believe it was released and made public along with all the others at the end of our investigation.
Was there any effort to keep his deposition transcript secret for a longer period of time?
No, absolutely not.
Was it the very last one released?
No, again, there was no rhyme or reason to the order in which they were released. We put them all at the end. I don't remember even when his was, we released them 10, 15, or 20, or 30 at a time, but over those last few days of the committee's existence. So I just don't know. But if your question is, was there an intentional effort to hold his, yeah, absolutely not.
Did Mr. Patel ever reach out to ask to provide testimony at a public hearing?
We never dealt with Mr. Patel directly. He was represented. I believe Ray Sofer at Bush Blackwell was his lawyer, and I don't remember Mr. Sofer ever making a request for Mr. Patel to testify at a public hearing.
Now, as an experienced investigator, why might an investigative team wait to release transcripts to the public until the end of an investigation?
Any kind of investigation is hampered if you're unable to discern what a witness is providing from personal knowledge versus things a witness may have heard from other sources. So it's very important to try to prevent public release or sharing in any way of information that you're learning during the investigation, because it makes it easier to sort of ensure that you're getting personal knowledge. So we didn't release either publicly or to witnesses what other witnesses said, even who other witnesses were, because we wanted to ensure that what we were getting from each witness was a product of his or her memory, not something that they read in the transcript or saw in a news report.
And is that
pretty standard? That was not a unique practice. It's like, I mean, that's the way I've always done this.
now? Did the Department of Defense produce documents to the January 6th committee?
Yes, a lot of documents. A lot of agencies did, defense included.
Did the Department of Defense refuse to produce or withhold documents, relevant documents that have been requested by the committee?
No, they were completely cooperative.
Would the request for documents that the January 6th committee sent to the Department of Defense have covered documents, if they existed, showing that President Trump had authorized 10 to 20,000 National Guard troops to be on the ready?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm not there.
What's the objection?
Your Honor, my understanding is that, well, first of all, this is calling for speculation. And secondly, it's beyond the scope of our understanding of what this witness is here for, is to describe the processes of the January 6th Commission, and to request the testimony of earlier witnesses or earlier pieces of evidence. He was called by the court essentially for the January 6th Commission not to be used as a witness on the petitioner's behalf. Had we probably would have prepared for the cross-examination if we had known that his testimony would be used in a substantive manner in this case.
Well, yesterday they advised the court that they were going to call them as a rebuttal specifically to the testimony of Mr. Patel and Ms. Pearson. And so his testimony is really isn't a surprise to me. And I don't think the question is speculative. Mr. Patel testified that there were documents showing this authorization and that they must not have been produced by the Department of Defense. And what I believe Mr. Brinsley is asking is if those documents existed, is there any understanding that things were being withheld? So, it's a long way of saying the objection is overruled.
So let me repeat the question. Would the document requests that were sent to the Department of Defense been broad enough to cover any documents that the Department of Defense had showing records of an authorization by the President for 10 to 20,000 National Guard troops to be on the ready?
Absolutely, and there was no such document produced.
Now, did you attend Mr. Patel's deposition?
I did.
Did you investigate the many assertions made by Mr. Patel in that deposition?
Both before and after, we asked him about conversations that other witnesses had related to us that they had with him, and then we continued to, as you do in every investigation, attempt to corroborate assertions. So yes, we plugged in the questions and answers from Mr. Patel into the evolving body of work of the select committee.
Were you able to observe Mr. Patel's demeanor during the deposition?
Yes.
Based on your investigation, including the deposition of Mr. Patel, do you have an opinion as to Mr. Patel's character for truthfulness or untruthfulness?
Objection, Your Honor.
Rule 608A allows this.
He's asking for opinion testimony, and I'm not sure Mr. Heaphy is an expert on judging character. Certainly hasn't been qualified by this court.
Your Honor, Colorado Rule of Evidence 608A allows for extrinsic testimony by individuals about a witness, and specifically allows them to provide an opinion as to that witness's character for truthfulness or untruthfulness. Mr. Heaphy has a basis for doing so. and he was allowed to do so. I'm certainly willing to provide the court with legal authority. If the court would like briefing on this, I think that would be fine, and we could take the testimony and then just decide afterwards whether it be stricken. But this is squarely within the confines of Rule 608A.
Sustaining the objection, you may ask him what parts of his testimony they were contradicted by other evidence, but I'm not going to let you have him opine on whether or not he thinks that Mr. Patel is a truthful person.
Mr. Heaphy, did your team investigate the claim that the president had authorized 10,000 to 20,000 National Guard troops to be on the ready?
Absolutely, yes. We did. We elicited testimony about that from Mr. Patel's boss, the acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller, who I believe testified on the record that there was no such order authorizing the deployment of 10,000 or any other number of National Guard troops.
Did you see?
Your Honor, we would object to that as hearsay and ask that you strike it.
Your Honor, this was part of the investigation. I was asking precisely what you had said I could ask him about.
The report is hearsay. The comment, any information within the report about those statements is hearsay. The witness's statement is, the statement the witness is testifying to is hearsay. It's intended to prove truth in the matter asserted. It's out of court statement. We have to honor at the time to talk to former Secretary of Defense Mark Mills, or I'm sorry, Chief of Staff Mark Mills. But I'm sorry, I'll get the right name. Secretary of the Army Miller. But it is hearsay, Your Honor.
I've already accepted the finding that they could find no evidence, including from Mr. Miller, about the 10 to 20,000 troops. So I'm going to sustain the objection that the testimony is cumulative.
No further questions on direct, Your Honor.
Just one. Could you hear my computer? Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Heaphy. Is it, and I apologize, do you pronounce your name Heaphy or Heaphy? I've heard it both ways.
Yeah, it's Heaphy with the long name. Thank you for the
Okay, thank you very much. So let me ask you a little bit about your experience. Do you have experience running large investigations?
Yes, was U.S. Attorney. As U.S. Attorney when I ran large investigations, and U.S. Attorney when I supervised them, the Charlottesville investigation was substantial and actually similar. So yes, before taking this position, I had supervised other investigations.
Okay, and were those investigations, would it be fair to say they were grand jury investigations, mostly?
Or some were not.
Okay. Did you supervise large grand jury investigations?
I did, yes, as a prosecutor.
Okay. So I think in your declaration, you had talked a little bit about sort of the number of documents and number of witnesses that the select committee called. Do you recall that? Okay. And it talked about maybe 1,000 or so witnesses and 1 million or so documents, those types of numbers, correct?
Yes.
And do you have experience, for example, in grand juries in investigations of that size?
I don't believe I've ever had a grand jury investigation that had quite that many witnesses, but it's probably a new peak in terms of volume of information.
Would it be fair to say, did you work in grand jury investigations with over 100 witnesses?
Yes.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that you worked in grand jury investigations of over 100,000 documents?
Definitely, yes.
Okay. And would you agree with me that those are, I guess, would you agree that those are substantial numbers of documents and witnesses?
I mean, it's all relative, but yes.
Oh.
In the hundreds of thousands, I would agree with you that that's substantial.
Okay. And did any of those investigations result in indictments?
Yes.
Okay. And after that indictment, you take that case to court, I assume, correct?
Someone does, yes.
When I say you, I speak in collective, your office. Okay. And did you ever go to the office, to the judge and say, Judge, we have a lot of witnesses, well over 100 witnesses, and we have over 100,000 documents, and so therefore you should accept these as true for, and you need not accept any more for a conclusion of guilt?
No, the majority of, when you say grand jury investigation, that is simply the first step in a criminal case, and a judge himself or herself cannot make make a summary finding. It's a jury decision and it has to be proven at a much different standard beyond reasonable doubt. So the procedural posture of the criminal process would not allow for what you're suggesting.
Right. And part of the reason for that is because that evidence would be subjected to the adversarial process. Would you agree with me on that?
Yes.
So you don't just take the evidence as hard as the court doesn't take the evidence, despite how hard a prosecution office may work on it, simply at face value, but requires it all to be subjected to the adversarial process, correct?
In criminal case, before a defendant can be convicted, there's a high standard of proof than that which applies in grand jury. Grand jury is probable cause. Guilt in criminal cases, guilt beyond reasonable doubt, and that's a higher standard.
But for a court to make that determination from a procedural standpoint, it has to subject that evidence to the adversarial process, correct?
It is adversarial process, yes. Is
Okay.
available in proceeding, not in grand jury.
Now, you talked a little bit about the House members, the members of the Select Committee, their involvement in the committee's activities, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then how it differs from your understanding of the normal process, correct?
Yeah, anecdotally, I think our members were more involved in the investigative process than they typically are in other congressional committees.
Okay. And it sounds like, and I'm asking you to repeat some of your testimony, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. So you talked, for example, about Mr. John Woods as a member of the investigatory staff, correct?
He was the co-leader of one of our 5 investigative
Okay.
teams. Yes, he was more senior than other lawyers and very much involved.
And you received his name through a reference from Representative Cheney. How did that work?
Yes, I believe Ms. Cheney introduced John to me as a potential staffer and asked me to speak to him. And when I did and got to see his qualifications, we hired him to co-lead the whole team. And he also had, I'm collaborating with being counsel with Ms. Cheney.
And Representative Kinzinger also recommended an attorney hire, correct?
I think with Mr. Kinzinger, his lawyer was already on the staff, and Kinzinger asked that he be sort of designated as his collaborating as the counsel to Mr. Kinzinger. He was a lawyer that came to us from Central Intelligence Agency, Steve Lyon.
And so did he represent Representative Kinzinger? Did he have an attorney-client relationship with Representative Kinzinger at the same time he was a staff member on the committee?
He was staff member of the committee exclusively, but part of his responsibility was to sort of be Mr. Kinzinger's counsel, so he had separate conversations with Mr. Kinzinger, of which I was not part of.
Okay. Now you said normally, I'm just trying to get a sense of the extent of your knowledge. You said normally congressional committees don't include sort of seasoned investigators of the type that you appointed or hired on the committee. Is that correct?
That's a generalization, but my anecdotal impression is that this sort of professional background of the lawyers that we hired on the select committee is atypical for congressional staff. Congressional staff lawyers are generally policy people and experts on policy, whereas I was looking more for investigative experience. And there are people in Congress who work in Congress with investigative experience, but not as much as in the Department of Justice.
Okay. Now I think you're in your declaration you talked a little bit about the members and the purpose of the committee. What was the purpose of the committee?
The facts and circumstances that informed the insurrection, the attack on the Capitol, and to make recommendations to try to instill, motivate changes in law that would make similar attacks in the future less likely.
And the members themselves, is it your belief that they went into the committee with an open mind as to the conclusions of the committee?
They were present for the event, so they certainly had some preconceived sense of what happened. But in terms of the overall findings of the committee, yes, I do believe that they were open-minded as to where the facts would lead as we conduct the investigation.
Okay. And was one of the conclusions of the committee that President Trump engaged in an insurrection?
Yes.
Okay. So was Representative Benny Thompson, was he the chair, am I correct, of the committee, or a co-chair?
Yes.
Okay.
He was the chairman, yes.
Okay. I'd like to show you what's Exhibit 1084.
Your Honor, I believe these are going to be tweets that were sent by members of the committee at some point after January 6th. We would object that Mr. Heaphy had personal knowledge of these, they not authenticated. But in any event, if the insinuation is that somehow only the members of the committee had a preconceived notion as to Mr. Trump's involvement, we would like the opportunity on redirect to show the many members of the Republican caucus who also had a similar view after January 6th.
I'm going to allow you to show the tweets, so the projection is overruled to the extent it's objecting to the tweets.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. Could you show Exhibit 1084, please? Oh, boy. I can't even read that myself. May I use your computer here?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
You're going to come stand over here.
Let me see right here. We're just having some technological fumbling on my part. Mr. Heaphy, I apologize. So, Mr. Heaphy, do you see this exhibit?
Yes.
Okay. And you see that that was sent by Representative Benny Thompson.
I see some tweets that he issued, looks like on January 6th, that the day itself.
Okay. And you see where he tweeted, Trump fed this vile monster, I'm sorry, said fed this monster with his vile and dangerous talk. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Is your view that that statement is consistent with going into the January 6th committee with a fair and open mind?
I think there were things that were obvious on January 6th, like what Congressman Thompson said, but the facts and circumstances that gave rise to those events was uncertain, and that was the task of the committee. So yes, I don't consider that statement to be one reflecting a closed mind at all.
And if I remember correctly, the committee, one of the things that the committee concluded was that President Trump himself was responsible for events, for the violence that occurred on January 6th. Is that correct?
President Trump and others, but conspirators, yes.
Okay. And so I'd like you to, we scroll down a little bit, I'd like you to look at that second tweet where it says, the events of today, referring to January 6th, are the inevitable result of the tyrannical and idiotic leadership of Donald Trump. In your view, would you view those as consistent with someone entering into these investigation with a fair and open mind?
Yes, again, it depends what you mean by fair and open mind. There were some things that were obvious on January 6th, but the overall view of what facts and circumstances informed those events was very much an open question and was the primary task of the committee. So, yes, I would consider Chairman Thompson to be open-minded throughout the course of the investigation.
Okay, could we go to Exhibit 1085, please? And do you see that first tweet where it says, former President Trump has to be held accountable for his actions that precipitated the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And is, in your view, that statement consistent with someone going into this investigation with an open mind?
Same response, yes.
Okay. And you see where he wrote on January 29th, it says, Donald Trump threatened our entire democracy by instigating this attack on our nation's capital. Do you see where it says that?
I do, yes.
And you say that when Representative Thompson said that President Trump threatened our democracy by instigating, that he instigated the attack, that he's entering into the investigation and deliberations with an open mind.
I don't think he's open-minded about that fact, but he's certainly open-minded about the scope of the investigation. I think that fact was obvious on January 6th.
That Donald Trump I'm sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
Please finish your answer.
Starting the investigation, certain things you know, certain things you don't know. The fact that President Trump instigated the attack is obvious on January 6th, just from his words during the speech on the list. We were plugging those facts into motivated them, how people reacted to them, the facts and circumstances, the response of unfortunate and otherwise. So just because certain facts are sort of obvious at the beginning of the investigation doesn't mean the investigation has reached a conclusion or is closed-minded. So again, to answer your question, I don't believe that statement reflects that there was that he was, I think your term is closed-minded. Also, in fact, according to the established, we still need to plug them into a much broader.
Do you think from those statements that Representative Thompson could be fair and impartial in his investigative approach for January 6th?
Absolutely, he was throughout the entire investigation.
Okay. You see where Representative Thompson in his tweet included this sort of block statement that says he summoned the mob, he assembled the mob, and he lit the flame of the attack. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. And it's your view, I'm assuming, that that is fully consistent with him being fair and impartial with respect to investigating President Trump's culpability or non-culpability for the events of January 6th.
We were not investigating the culpability or non-culpability of any one person. We were investigating the facts and circumstances that informed the attack on the Capitol. Certain things were obvious at the beginning, other things were not. So in terms of his overall approach to the investigation, to fill out all of the relevant facts and circumstances, I don't believe he was in any way biased or had a preconceived notion.
So you said there were certain facts that were obvious in the obvious at the start of the investigation. And I believe, and I just want to make sure I'm correct, that one of the facts that was obvious at the start of the investigation was that Donald Trump instigated the violence. Is that correct?
Donald Trump talked about violence directly, yes, during his speech in the list.
So is that a yes to my question?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
Could the court reporter please repeat the question?
So you said there were certain facts that were obvious at the start of the investigation. And I believe, and I just want to make sure I'm correct, that one of the facts that was obvious at the start of the investigation was that Donald Trump instigated the violence. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I can barely hear. What was it?
I'm going to read it because you can't hear the court reporter because she doesn't have the microphone. So the question was, so you said there were certain facts that were obvious at the start of the investigation, and I believe, and I just want to make sure I'm correct, that one of the facts that was obvious at the start of the investigation was that Donald Trump instigated the violence. Is that correct?
Yes, Donald Trump said, if you fight that battle, you won't have country anymore. That was something that was stated fact instigate violence. So yes, the answer to that question is yes.
Okay, let's go to Exhibit 1086. Was Representative Lofgren, Zoe Lofgren, a member of the commission?
She's a member of the select committee, yes.
I'm sorry, the committee. My apologies. So I'm going to show you what's designated as Exhibit 1086. And in that, are you able to see that? Okay, and I ask you that because at the moment I can't see you, but we'll continue from the video. I can certainly hear you. And she says in the last sentence of that tweet, Trump incited this and he's a threat to the security of our country. Is it your testimony that that statement is consistent with being fair and impartial in the investigation?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to Exhibit 1087. And this, it looks like at the top is an official press statement from Ms. Lofgren. And in it, she says that, can you scroll down just a little bit? Excuse me one moment, Mr. Heaphy. She says, if you see that paragraph that begins in italicized font towards the bottom of it, today we don't need a long investigation to know the president incited right-wing terrorists to attack the Congress to try to overturn constitutional government. And it's your view that that statement is consistent with Ms. Lofgren being fair and impartial on the committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, like I would characterize that and all of these essentially sort of hypotheses based on observations at that point that can certainly inform the investigation, but I don't consider them to represent a closed mind about those facts and circumstances. Same answer as I have with Chairman Thompson's tweets.
Okay.
Yes,
Well,
they certainly had opinions at the beginning based on their own observation that I would call hypotheses that were a starting point. We were comparing everything we learned to those hypotheses. That's what happens in an investigation.
okay. I'm going to go through a number of additional exhibits. We'll go through them quickly. I'll ask you the same questions. I assume you'll give me the same answers. And we'll try to move this.
You provided these three earlier today. I've seen them all, and yes, we'll have the same answer to all of the member tweets reflecting this perspective.
Okay, so let's do this. Since we personally, on our side, didn't provide them, I'm just going to go to the exhibits. I'm going to say, is that one of the exhibits that you saw, to which you will provide the same answer if I read parts of the exhibit. Can we do that?
Well, so I don't know that it is into evidence. It's being used for impeachment. So if you want me to hear the impeachment here, and I unfortunately have to walk through it.
Let's walk right through it then. Let's go to exhibit 1088, please.
Well, yes, it is. It's impeaching his. He says that everybody was fair and open to any possibilities of where the investigation could lead, and Mr. Gessler is saying no, they weren't. I think that's proper impeachment.
So do you see this exhibit here?
I do, yes.
So it says, while we were performing our duties, the President of the United States, in an unconscionable act of sedition and insurrection, incited a violent mob to attack the Capitol. See where it says that? And that, in your view, is that is consistent with someone being fair and impartial in an investigation?
I think that was Mr. Schiff's hypothesis, informed by events that he observed, but does not reflect him or others to have the court's mind.
Okay. Let's go to exhibit 1095, please. One moment, Mr. Heaphy. Can you stand up right next to me here, Joanna? Let's do it that way. And it says, towards the end of the first paragraph, it says, Aguilar spoke on the House floor to call on his Republican colleagues to uphold their oaths of office by holding the president accountable and supporting impeachment. So here's where Representative Aguilar is asking others to hold the president accountable and support impeachment. And then later in the next paragraph, it says, when the president sent a mob to the Capitol, radicalized by his lies about the result of a free and fair election to stop the counting of the electoral votes, he made it clear that he poses a grave threat to our democracy. In your view, that statement is also consistent with Representative Aguilar being fair and impartial in the investigation in January 6th.
Yeah, the reference to impeachment instructions, there was a proceeding in Congress seeking to impeach the president based on some of the same facts that were issued in our investigation. I think all 9 members that they voted that he should be impeached when that proceeding took place before the committee started. So yes, they had made some preliminary determinations, hypotheses based on what they saw. But again, wanted us to plug that into the test against all the evidence that we were finding. So I don't believe Aguilar or any of the others had made any conclusion other than that preliminary one informed impeachment vote.
Okay. You see where it says Representative Stephen Murphy. I'm showing you tweets from her. Was she a member of the Select Committee?
Yes, she was.
Okay. And here she says the president incited a violent insurrection against our democracy. Proof he's unable to uphold the Constitution. Is that statement consistent with her being fair and impartial in this investigation?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Let's go to Exhibit 1099, please. Let's scroll down, please. Okay. So this says that the 9 impeachment managers will present, this is the second to the last paragraph, the 9 impeachment managers appointed by the House of Representatives will present overwhelming evidence of the facts of former President Trump's incitement of the violent insurrection that took place in and around the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Is that statement consistent with Representative Raskin's ability to be fair and impartial as a member of the committee?
Yes, that response discussing led the impeachment proceeding against the chief prosecutor, if you will. But I don't believe that made him closed-minded about the overall factual circumstances that gave rise to those actions.
Okay, so even though he said there was overwhelming evidence, and even though he said there was overwhelming evidence that President Trump had incited a violent insurrection, and even though he actually led the prosecution of President Trump, you're saying that he remained fair and impartial in determining the conclusion, in investigating and coming up with conclusions on the January 6th Select Committee. Is that correct?
Yes, because the goal of the January 6th committee was not about the culpability of any one person. It was about the overall facts and circumstances that informed the attack, all of the various components of it. The president's incitement of violent insurrection was one among hundreds of facts and circumstances that were considered. And even that, if there had been contrary evidence, we would have presented that. So I don't believe any of these statements about this one fact among many represent that any of our members were, to use your term, closed-minded in the approach to the investigation.
I'll represent to you that I've not used closed-minded, but I'm not going to object to your characterization. Let's go to the next. Let's go to the next exhibit, 1101, please. So here it says, and this is a remark from. I'll represent to you that this is a remark from Representative Luria. Did Representative Luria serve on the commission? I'm sorry, on the committee.
Yes, so the committee did.
Okay. And here it says that encouraged and emboldened by President Trump. Do you agree with me that that statement indicates that President Trump encouraged and emboldened people, that that's the meaning of that phrase?
I believe that's what was intended, yes.
Okay. And it's your belief that that statement is consistent with the investigation, with a fair and impartial investigation by the January 6th committee. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to Exhibit 1105, please. And this looks like an official statement from Representative Cheney. Is that correct?
I think so, yes.
Okay. And did Representative Cheney serve on the Select Committee?
She was the vice chair appointed at the select committee.
Okay. And scroll up just a little bit. Okay. I'm sorry, scroll down. So do you see where it says, the President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the President. Do you see where it says that?
I think yes.
And is that statement consistent with Representative Cheney approaching the workings of the Select Committee in a fair and impartial manner?
I believe Ms. Cheney was always fair and impartial, yes. And I apologize for using the wrong term before close-minded. I all of it was fair and impartial throughout the process.
There's no apology needed, although I appreciate that. Let's look at Exhibit 1106, please. And this looks like an official statement from Representative Kinzinger. Is that correct?
So, yes.
Okay. And if you look at the sort of second, the third paragraph, final paragraph, I'll say, where it says, there is no doubt in my mind that the President of the United States broke his oath of office and incited this insurrection. See where it says that?
Yes.
Okay. And is that statement consistent with approaching the workings of the Commission in a fair and impartial manner?
I believe so, yes. And this also reminds me that I think all of these statements that you're showing me were put forth at the time of the impeachment proceeding, and they were declaring their position on impeachment. I would vote, what he says in this very statement, I would vote for impeachment. So he had a very personal decision, and what he had seen and had been presented was sufficient to vote in favor of impeachment. Our language is much broader.
Okay.
Thank you. So I don't believe that Mr. Kinzinger and others were being fair and impartial.
So let's talk about that impeachment proceeding for a second. So the impeachment proceeding, is it your understanding that the articles of impeachment were whether or not President Trump had engaged in an insurrection? Is that correct?
No,
Okay.
I think they did involve insurrection, but I just don't recall.
Okay, I'm going to represent to you, for purposes of my question, that in fact it did include a vote on whether or not President Trump incited an insurrection. And you said that all members of the commission had voted yes on the impeachment question. Is that correct?
I believe that's right, yes.
Okay. Do you know how many? Do you know roughly what the vote was overall?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't recall. I think all Democrats and some Republicans voted for impeachment.
Okay. I'm going to represent to you that there were 232 votes in favor of impeachment, which constituted 54% of the voting members. And I'm going to represent to you that 197 members voted no, which constituted 46%. What percentage, just to be sure again, what percentage of the members of the Select Commission voted no on the impeachment?
I believe many of our members had previously voted no. I believe all of them were in that 4% majority that voted yes.
Okay. So would you agree with me then that with respect to the perspective that President Trump incited an insurrection, that 46% of the members of Congress, their points of view were not represented on the committee?
That assumes that everyone voted no, voted true to their conscience and their personal belief, and I'm not certain I can say that that's accurate. I think a lot of people voted no, and they actually probably should. That's my personal opinion.
Okay. Okay. Now, did the committee have any minority, any staff that was controlled by a minority opinion? Let me back up a little bit. Is it your understanding that congressional committees normally have a majority staff and a minority staff?
Yes.
Okay. And your commission did, and your procedures for the select committee did not have a separate minority staff. Is that correct?
We had one staff, that's right. It was not a majority and minority.
Okay. Were there any, do you know of any other commission committee, and I understand the limitations of your testimony earlier, but are you aware of any other committee in congressional history or modern congressional history that lacked a second minority staff?
I just don't know. There may be, but I don't have any personal knowledge of a point of comparison.
Okay. Okay. Let's one moment, please. Excuse me, just one moment, please, Your Honor. I'm going to pull up what's been marked as Exhibit 1108. Do you see that? Okay. Let's go to the third page of that, top of the third page. Do you see the paragraph that begins with, there was a lot of advanced intelligence about law enforcement? Do you see that? And that's a quote, and I believe the article quotes you. Did you make that statement?
I did.
Okay. And you say there was a lot of intel in advance that was pretty specific, and it was enough in our view for law enforcement to have done a better job, correct?
We've done a better job, yes.
Okay.
I still believe that to be accurate.
Okay. And that advanced intelligence was about the potential for violence at the Capitol, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And now when you say advanced intelligence, did you mean intelligence or intelligence reports appearing before January 6th?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember how far in advance, by any chance? I mean, did the spectrum of advanced knowledge? Do you have any memory? I'm trying to get a sense. Was it 1 hour before the start of January 6th? Was it 2 years before the start of January 6th? Can you provide a time frame there?
I can tie it very specifically to a tweet from President Trump on December 19th, where he made very first reference to January 6th and encouraged people to come to the Capitol and said, big protests in D.C., be they or will be wild. It was immediately thereafter that intelligence started showing people's intent to come in the potential for violence. That was the spark, really, that ultimately erupted in violence on January 6th.
Okay. And so you started receiving lots of intel after that tweet, correct? Or various law enforcement agencies received that intel after that tweet?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And let's go to the 9th page. Okay. You see, okay. You see where it says one of the tips entered in Guardian on December 27th came from a person who was reading traffic on a website called the Donald.win, a hive of January 6th rhetoric. Do you see that? Okay. What was Guardian?
Guardian is a FBI system in which field agents submit information to a central database. They're called Guardians, the tips themselves are called Guardians. And the FBI, I believe, received 55 Guardians that were all placed under that cert unrest umbrella. And I believe that this piece from Donald.win that's quoted in this article is one such Guardian.
Okay. And it says below that, it says, they think that they will have a large enough group to march into D.C. armed and will outnumber the police so they can't be stopped, the tipster wrote. They believe that since the election was stolen, that it's their constitutional right to overtake the government, and during this coup, no U.S. laws apply. Their plan is to literally kill people. Please take this tip seriously and investigate further. Was that one of the pieces of evidence, or one of the, was that the tip that was entered into Guardian on December 27th?
That was one of many tips that were entered into the Guardian system. I don't recall it specifically, but I know about some from sector. But that sounds consistent with the kind of information that started to emerge between 2019 and 2018.
Okay. Did you or the committee form an opinion that there was that there were plans for violence that were made in advance of January 6th?
Yes, I believe driveways, keepers, there were multiple people in the crowd that did have very specific plans to commit violence at Capitol on January 6th.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, vicious conspiracy requires these things to be enforced in criminal courts, separate and apart from the subcommittee process.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. This article also says, and I'm looking for the quote, but I'll simply ask you, that the final commission reports downplayed the failures of law enforcement agencies to fully prepare for January 6th. Do you agree with that conclusion in the article?
No, we published every interview that we did with law enforcement otherwise. There were several appendices to the report as well, that detailed those law enforcement failures. We downplayed in the report.
Okay.
I'll say that the report, which is better than the whole facts and circumstances, studies law enforcement with context, but it took nothing away, in our view, from the cause of the event, President Trump inciting the mob. The law enforcement failures made violence, unfortunately, more prevalent, but it did not detract from the overall conclusion that the causation of the attack was President States and the whole conspiracy to disrupt the transfer of power in the transition.
Okay. And that causation was one of the obvious facts that members of the commission and yourself concluded had occurred even before the January 6th Select Committee began its investigations, correct?
I guess I would call it more of an hypothesis with which we started. It was what they already decided, at least preliminarily through the impeachment process. We were continually testing our evidence against that hypothesis. It did not change. We ultimately reinforced that
So-
over the course of the
So let me ask you this, and we obviously this transcript will be used as part of the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law and used by the judge. But I'll represent to you that earlier in your testimony you stated that the fact that President Trump instigated was viewed as a fact that was obvious on January 6th. Is that correct?
At the beginning, yes, it was obvious, but I would classify it as an obvious fact that they brought to an operating hypothesis and informed the approach to the investigation. Continually testified evidence.
So you're saying that it began as an obvious fact, it then became a hypothesis, and then it resulted in the same conclusion at the end of the committee's work. Is that correct?
No, it never changed. It was something that was obvious from the events of the day that were there. It was the hypothesis that began the investigation, informed the impeachment proceeding. But I'm saying we tested it, as we always do in the investigation, against other facts as they emerged, and it never changed. The hypothesis was not relented or disputed. So there's no evolution. But it was, to be clear, tested and plugged into a much more fulsome body of work beyond what had been obvious at the time of those tweets in the impeachment proceeding.
Okay. So, Mr. Heaphy, you were appointed by President Obama as U.S. Attorney, correct?
Yes.
And President Obama was, and I believe still is, a Democrat, correct?
Yes, he is.
Okay. And you were appointed to the January 6th committee as an investigator by Representative Pelosi. Is that correct?
Well, Chairman Thompson made the decision, but yes, the Speaker was involved in it, hiring the senior staff.
Okay. And both former Speaker Pelosi and Representative Thompson, they were both Democrats, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Have you ever been appointed to a position by a Republican?
I don't think so. No,
Okay. In fact, you were fired. I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Please complete your question. I apologize.
You want to talk about firing? I'm happy to. I was removed in my position as University Counsel by a Republican Attorney General who defeated an incumbent Democrat. I was an assistant Attorney General in Virginia as University Counsel, and without explanation, without over-objection of my client at the university, the new Republican Attorney General terminated my absence while I was on counseling.
Thank you, Mr. Heaphy. You just saved me a few questions. I appreciate that openness. Mr. Heaphy, you've made a number of political contributions over the years, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'll see if we can short circuit a number of questions. But have you ever made contributions? Have you made any contributions to Democrats?
Yes.
In fact, almost, if not all, of your contributions have been to Democrats, correct?
I think so. I don't know for sure, but I don't recall right now making a contribution to
I'm sorry. Did you say you don't recall making a contribution to a Republican?
I do not.
Okay.
I was trying to think like a John Lee funny when we ran for Senate. I just don't think I don't believe I did.
Can you repeat what was the name of the person that you considered making a contribution to?
John was a staffer on the Justice Committee, and he left to run for Senate in Missouri. I don't know if I gave him money or not. I think he paid us. He's on secretary, so I may not have. But so to be clear, I'm Democrat. I've been money to Democrats my whole life. That's actually right.
Okay. Are you currently investigating or seeking the possibility of being appointed as a federal judge?
No.
Okay. Have you had any conversations with anyone about seeking a federal judicial appointment?
I had conversations with some people are not interested in being a federal judge. With all respect to judges.
I am not insulted by that answer. It's a difficult job. One moment, please. Mr. Heaphy, thank you very much for your time today. I have no further questions right now.
Thank you.
Can you redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Heaphy, I think you've answered this question, but you had answered in response to many questions about statements and tweets that have been issued in kind of the January 2021 timeframe that they were hypotheses that were tested. How were those hypotheses tested by the investigative staff on the January 6th committee?
We compared that to what we were hearing from other witnesses, what we were seeing in documents, from what we were learning from the review of source material. Every investigation starts with a hypothesis. That's the nature of it. There's a suspect in a criminal investigation. Sometimes that's reinforced, sometimes it's rebutted. So, if I answer the questions, really everything we did was always plugging in, continuing to synthesize, and comparing it to our understanding of facts and circumstances.
And if you had found evidence that contradicted that hypothesis, what would you have done?
Absolutely, we would have found it as such. We would have made that clear. When I was hired by the chairman, he gave me an instruction that was reinforced throughout, which is follow the facts and circumstances wherever they lead. And that's what we instructed to do. We followed them. They ended up affirming the hypothesis, but that was a constant reassessment of the follow.
And after over a year of investigation and discussions with the numerous witnesses that you all had and the review of documents and video, what was and testing that hypothesis, what was the conclusion of the January 6th committee with regard to President Trump's culpability in the January 6th attack?
Well, over the course of our hearings and report, the conclusion we found is fact that there was an intentional multi-part plan led by the president and facilitated by him and others to disrupt the recession and prevent the transfer of power. That is palpable throughout our hearings and explicitly stated in the report.
And what were your conclusions about whether President Trump incited a violent insurrection on January 6th?
His incitement of violence was the final step of that multi-part prong to try to disrupt the transfer of power. We reinforced the hypothesis of his incitement. It brought from just the words on their lips, fight like hell, or you're not going to country anymore, a much broader pattern, which incitement models just one final desperate step.
Now, there has been some suggestion that the January 6th committee was populated by Democrats and rhinos who had already prejudged President Trump's guilt. Are you familiar with other members of Congress who had also made statements in the weeks and months after the attack on January 6th regarding President Trump's culpability, including Republicans?
Yeah, I believe our hearings featured statements by Leader McCarthy and Senate Minority Leader McConnell and other Republicans essentially agreeing that the president bore bear responsibility or incited the violence. Those things came up soon after the events in the course of the impeachment proceedings.
Just waiting. You had mentioned that Speaker McCarthy said that President Trump, in the days after the attack, bore responsibility, correct?
Your Honor, I am going to object to this line of questioning. I asked him his understanding with respect to potential members of the committee, because we're talking about the processes of committee not processes or political opinions people may have had outside of the committee. Those are not relevant, nor part of my question, nor do we think appropriately for part of the direct exam.
Well, there was a suggestion, Your Honor, that if one held a certain opinion shortly after January 6th, they were closed-minded and wouldn't change it. But I think Speaker McCarthy, or former Speaker McCarthy, is a very good example of somebody whose opinion may have changed over time.
I think that you can bring in hearsay to impeach, but I'm not sure that you can bring in hearsay to rehabilitate the impeachment. Plus, hyperbole, someone is sustaining objection.
That's fine, Your Honor. I'll move on. I think the point is made. You were asking questions about Exhibit 1108, which was an article, I think, published earlier this year, which you gave some quotes, or at least there were some things you said that were quoted in. Do you recall that? And do you recall there being some effort to use the quotes from that article to suggest that the January 6th committee had somehow omitted key evidence?
Yes, I think Congresswoman Green used a clip a link to that interview and suggested the January 6th committee found that the law enforcement was involved. And I rebutted that. My first and only series of tweets, the only time I've ever actually tweeted something, was a direct response in the wake of that NBC report.
Can we put up Plaintiff's Exhibit 320, please?
Your Honor, I guess I would object to this. The question was, did he agree with the statement in that article? He said no, did not authenticate it, did not endorse it, and that was the end of it.
I think the article was brought up to suggest that there were other. Yes, exactly. Do you see Plaintiff's Exhibit 320? Was that one of the tweets, your 15 minutes of fame on Twitter, where you sent out a tweet following the publication of the article?
Yeah, I think I actually opened my account that day for this purpose, and there were maybe 3 or 4 successive statements that directly addressed my statements in that article. And yes, this looks like the first or one of the series of tweets that it looks like that addressed the statement.
Could you read this tweet, please?
President Trump and his co-conspirators devised and pursued a multi-part plan aimed to prevent the transfer of power. That should be to prevent the transfer of power. He incited the crowd on January 6th. He failed to act during riots. I urged to do so. He and his enablers bear primary responsibility for the attack.
And I'll ask you to just read a little more slowly because I'm going to ask you to read a second one too. Can you put up Plaintiff's Exhibit 321?
It says, I recently spoke to NBC News about law enforcement planning for January 6th. Since that interview, someone used my comments to suggest law enforcement had prevented the riot. That's false. The proximate cause of the attack on the Capitol was President Trump.
And finally, I want to ask you some questions about intelligence that was gathered prior to January 6th, following December 19th, and specifically the Guardian platform that you had talked about during cross-examination, okay?
Sure.
Was the committee ever able to discover or find out what specific intelligence was communicated to the president that the FBI had gathered?
No, unfortunately, we can't say how much, if any, of those Guardians or other intelligence was briefed to the president. We did have testimony that on the morning of January 6th, the president was directly informed about the president's weapons in the crowd. We had evidence that the night before, he commented to a group of White House staffers. They're very depressed, very angry. So there's some evidence of his awareness of danger or potential for violence before his speech on the lips. But I can't say, Mr. President, that we were able to determine that he was directly briefed about any of that intelligence. That was one of the many things that we just could never get to the bottom of.
Was there some evidence about what Mr. Trump was told at the ellipse about individuals having weaponry?
Yes, he had testimony that he was told about weaponry, that he actually asked that the magnetometer be moved and saying, these people aren't here to hurt me. That he was very specifically made aware by staff of the presence of weapons in the crowd and proposed actually to bring weapons into the event.
So I want to look very quickly at one of the pages you were shown from Exhibit 1108. If we could go to page 9, please. And this will be the same, I think, quote from the Guardian tipster that you were asked about. If you could blow up the second to last paragraph, please. Do you recall being asked a question about this very specific, or this very piece of evidence?
Yes.
And the tipster says they think they will have a large enough group to march into D.C. armed and will outnumber the police, so they can't be stopped. The quote goes on, they believe that since the election was stolen, that it's their constitutional right to overtake the government, and during this coup, no U.S. laws apply. Their plan is to literally kill. Please take this tip seriously and investigate further. Do you see that? And did you review the president's speech at the Ellipse on January 6th as part of the investigation?
Yes, absolutely. Consistent message to the election was stolen, constitutional rights overtake government, different rules apply, different laws apply. I mean, these are actually public speeches, but there's no rules apply or different rules apply, consistent with the president's rhetoric.
Let me put up the speech. So Plaintiff's Exhibit 1029, page 14. Blow up the top, please. Page 14, top of the page. And this is a transcript of the Ellipse speech. And President Trump says, the Republicans have to get tougher. You're not going to have a Republican Party if you don't get tougher. They want to play so straight. They want to play so, sir, yes, the United States, the Constitution doesn't allow me to send them back to the states. Well, I say, yes, it does. Because the Constitution says you have to protect our country, and you have to protect our Constitution, and you can't vote on fraud. And fraud breaks up everything, doesn't it? When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. How does that compare to that piece of intelligence taken from The Guardian and cited in Exhibit 1108?
Very, very close. The president repeatedly talked about the election being stolen without actual support, and did refer to the fact that different rules apply, saying that to an angry mob of people on the list, inciting violence.
No further questions.
Okay, let's recess until, let's make it 3 or 5, so 20 minutes, and we'll finish up with, sorry.
No questions.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Jack is sitting all alone, it's really easy to forget you. It's like you're at the kids' table.